Los Angeles, California, and Flint, Michigan. Both of these cities are primarily comprised of people of color, and both of these cities have the same issue of hazardous waste being exposed to the residents, causing major health issues. This is an example of environmental racism. So when we think of racism, we tend to think of it on an interpersonal level. Bullying, somebody calling someone else a slur, overt disrespect towards someone else because of their race. Environmental racism is a systemic racism, and systemic racism is more covert. It's widespread, it's governmental, it's harder to dismantle, and it's harder to spot. But when you look at studies and do extensive research, you realize a pattern and you have to call it out. So I pulled from the CDC and the Natural Resource Defense Council. Both of these corporations have done extensive research on environmental racism and have written many journals and many studies and published things of the sort to expose environmental racism. So let's zoom in on Flint, Michigan. Flint's story started in 2014, where the city decided to switch out its water supply from Detroit to the Flint River. Before they did this, they did not do any type of testing on the Flint River to make sure it was safe for the residents to consume that water. It was not safe. The Flint River had extremely high levels of lead, and this resulted in very, very many symptoms of the environmental racism and health issues. The residents complained of itchy skin, rashes, hair loss, and there was even a study done that corresponded the lead levels within the water to the high blood lead levels in the children of Flint. The poor response to the city's grievances and concerns was so bad that the Michigan Civil Rights Committee categorized it as an example of systemic racism. And the battle in Flint lasted for 10 years. And with the help of journalists, doctors, activists, and scientists, the city was able to get its lead levels down to the appropriate amount. But this was after 10 long years. Taken from PubMed Health Central, global warming and other climate exposure greatly affects racial popularities and lower income populations. There's even about a 15-year life expectancy difference between wealthy white communities and lower income communities of color with high versus low exposure to pollutants. And according to the CDC, Black communities' pollution levels are 13.7% higher than white communities. This results in African Americans disproportionately experiencing hypertension, asthma, and are even 30% more likely to die of cardiovascular disease than their white counterparts. These environmental exposures cause chronic illness in these communities, which is a symptom of environmental racism. New Deal era redlining policies isolate these communities of color along ethnic and racial lines, making it easier for them to be in proximity to these pollution sources. And these 1930s era redline communities are also present day sites of high levels of environmental racism and environmental health disparities. And let's take a look at California now. According to the CDC, Black communities in California are disproportionately exposed to oil and gas wells. This exposure to oil and gas wells causes high increases in PM 2.5 concentration. Exposure to such high levels of concentration, according to Science Direct, high exposure to these PM 2.5 triggers inflammation and oxidative stress and is connected to other major health issues. Along with higher health risks due to proximity to the pollution sites, Black communities also lack the infrastructure that would reduce air pollution and chronic illness. An example of this is parks, trees. Have you ever noticed when you take a stroll down a white or higher level suburban area, you tend to see more sidewalks, you tend to see more pedestrian focused areas, and lining these pedestrian focused areas, you see a lot of trees that shade the sidewalk. That provides a level of protection from the sun and environmental global warming factors. And according to the CDC, this combination of environmental factors places densely populated communities of color under extreme threats of disproportionately experiencing environmental health disparities. And in conclusion, knowing how pollution and exposure to hazardous communities of color allows us to understand that race is a strong indicator of hazardous exposure to pollutants instead of class. This information highlights how systemic racism forces communities of color to bear the brunt and the consequences of pollution produced by big corporations. Thank you.